A few years ago, the Indian mystic Krishnamurti, who was probably a fraud, but nevertheless, he wrote quite an interesting short essay called "Listening to the Silence," and in which he kind of evokes this practice of, well, as it says in the name of the essay, listening to the silence. He's sort of alluding to a feature of much mystical practice, including the ones that he was involved in, which I think was theosophy and a range of other things, in which it's assumed that behind surface differences and behind material reality there's some other source of reality. It's part of the perennial philosophy, this idea. This sort of reality which underpins our day-to-day existence, sometimes called the ground of all being. And Krishnamurti's listening to the silence seems to be an attempt to engage with the ground of all being by mobilizing the auditory sense, albeit with no obvious target for that audition. So you're listening to something, or you're listening for something, but the something you are listening for is not a sound, it's the absence of a sound. So it seems to be a kind of mobilization of attentional resources, a deliberate mobilization of attentional resources and intention indeed, toward an end point or toward a goal which is evacuated of content. There seems to be a suggestion there that in terms of consciousness, that rather than focusing on the content of consciousness, one becomes aware of consciousness itself somehow. I mean, that seems to be the logic behind that. I'm reminded a little bit also of an essay by a French-Canadian author, I think she's French-Canadian, maybe she's just French, called Claire Petit-Magnon Peugeot, I think. I don't know if it's something like that. Again, I will find out when I get home. And she wrote an essay in the Journal of Consciousness Studies, which was sort of an empirical set of experiments she carried out, or at least a piece of research that she carried out using interviews, kind of action research model, in which she was talking to counsellors and advisors and people whose job really was to be quite intuitive about the emotional states of other people, and the people who were notionally quite keyed in to very, very subtle effects. And one of the things that she found is that, in terms of the way they described what they were doing, is that there was a phase in that intuitive engagement which many of these counsellors and these practitioners referred to as listening. It's kind of internal listening, though. It wasn't a listening to the silence that Krishnamurti talks about, but nevertheless it's a kind of listening which focuses on one's own internal states, such that you can kind of hear when sounds bizarre. You can sort of hear how the other person is feeling by listening to one's own internal sounds or resonances. They're not sounds, metaphorical sounds. There seems to be a very tangential relationship, certainly with Peugeot's work, to recent findings, I believe, in a relationship between people who are very good at introception, very good at literally sort of listening and sensing what's happening inside their body, people who can detect the rate of their heartbeat, for example, who are very attuned to the sounds and movements that are taking place inside their body. A relationship. So, but those people who are very good at that tend to be also very empathetic. They're very good at judging and gauging the behaviours and the emotional sets that other people seem to be occupying. I think there's even a name for this. It seems to it occupies. It has some sort of neural correlate, which I think is called something like phi, the phi state, PHI, but I'm not absolutely sure what that's there. There seems to be in people whose interoceptive states, emotional states, are in tune through this kind of act of mutual interoception. There's also an alignment of a neural brainwave function, which I think is called phi. So although Krishnamurti was probably a wacko, there does seem to be some interesting spin-offs of this use of listening as a kind of metaphor for a way of engaging with non-conventional, non-standard modes of engagement, non-objective certainly, but not even subjective also, a kind of intercorporeal way of behaving, which requires a certain sort of listening, in which the listening, whilst it may be directed inward, functions interpersonally.